So we're now on Daf Vav Hamid Aleph. Mika Raminan Le Ale Bal Karcha. There's a fundamental difference between the situation of the Yavam and that of another person. And that is that as far as another person marrying her, she was a suspected adulteress. But nevertheless, he decides that, okay, let's say she did what she did and she was machriv his bias, but nevertheless, I'm willing to marry her. So from his perspective, it's like waiving this chashash. But in the case of Yavam, we don't have that situation because Yavam is Bal Karch. He has to marry his Yivimto. That's Mitzvahs Yibum. And the Gemara applies in Yevamos what's called Mitzvahs Yibum Kodemus, Mitzvahs Chalitza. So how could we be mechayev him in the mitzvah of Yibum when this woman may have completely wrecked her first house, and now you're going to you obligate the Eishes Ach, the Yavam, to put himself in a situation where she may wreck his house as well. Of Yosef. Now we have a different transmission of Rav Yosef as to why, in the case of a Sotah, when her husband dies without any children, she requires chalitza but no yibum. Rav Yosef says that the Sotah is excluded from yibum, and that is because hakosav kra'o acher. And we're talking about a person who marries a woman after she was divorced by her husband because of znus, and she'ein ben zugo shel rishon shezeh hotzi rishon mi beiso, and v'zeh hichnis rishon l'sof beiso. So it means, I'll just read to you this particular translation. He says the following. Now, the pasuk uses the word acher. That means the second husband that would marry her is called an acher. She'ein ben zugo shel rishon. He is not different, or shall we say, morally inferior to the counterpart, meaning the first husband. And shezeh hotzi rishon mi beiso, v'zeh hichnis rishon l'sof beiso. So the acher is considered as if he brings a wicked person, meaning the Sotah, into his house, whereas the previous husband, the original husband, rejected her and got rid of her because he didn't want to have a wicked person in his house. And now, in the case of Yibum, are we going to encourage the Yavam to take this woman into his house? We're looking at the Acher as if he's ein shel rishon, and he's not similar to the original. So the Torah should have said the ish sheni. Why does it say ish acher? And the word ish acher is a pejorative, like it says Elohim achirim, to contrast the ish acher who's marrying her, despite the fact that he's bringing a woman who's wicked into his house with the first husband who rejected him. And now you're going to tell me that the Torah is going to expect of a Yavam to bring a wicked woman into his house. What happens now if she gets married to someone else? And that person is called an acher because he brought a rasha, a wicked person, into his house. Is then, in such a case, when a second husband marries her following the gerushin of her first husband, and he dies without any children, lotus yamin, takosiv karo acher. The Torah is saying that he's a wicked person because he married her. And therefore, why would his death precipitate the mitzvah of Yibum? Why would the Torah obligate the brother, the surviving brother of the second husband who died, to marry that woman and bring a wicked woman into his house? And the Gemara answers, she has a good record in the marriage of the second husband. In other words, with regard to the second husband who married her, we see no chashash of znus. So maybe it means that even if she was in fact guilty of znus under the first husband, the second husband she did tshuva, and therefore with his death, she falls for Yibum. Rava has another explanation as to why a Sotah is excluded from Yibum. Kal v'chomer. Im nesra b'mutar, if through becoming a Sotah, she's asura to her husband, who for the entire balance of their married life, she was muteris, is be asura. Now we're talking about a brother-in-law who's an erva. That's called Eishes Achiv, lo kolshkein. How much more so should she be asura? Which means that the Yavama is coming from the issues of the first marriage. And since her stira in the first marriage was pogeh b'nesuin with her first husband, and she became asura on a husband that she was muteres, how much more so in the case where the nesuin rishonim is going to project Yibum? How could it project Yibum when it projects a chiv of gerushin? And for sure, you don't want to be matir her to an erev of Eishes Ach in a situation where, as far as her husband is concerned, she became asura. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye says, Elamei Ata, according to your logic, Rava, based on your kal v'chomer, to prohibit her on the Yavam, is Kohen Gadol shekidish almana. If a Kohen Gadol violates the Iser to marry an almana, umeis, and he dies without children, the Yeshlo ach Kohen Hedjot, and his surviving brother is a Kohen Hedjot who's allowed to marry an almana, so now she falls as an almana for Yibum to the brother. Lotus Yamin. We should apply your kal v'chomer, Rava. Why? Im nesra b'mutala. If she was asura to her husband who's a Kohen Gadol, is be asur lo kolshkein. What about a Yavam who's an Eishes Ach? How much more so should she be asura? In other words, the matir for the Eishes Ach is mikah kedusha rishon. And in the Kedusha Rishon, it was a Kohen Gadol who married an almana, which means there was a pagam in that marriage. And now, kolshkein, she should not be able to be misyamim, and the yibum would be generated by the first Kedushin to be matir and Eishes Ach when the first Kedushin themselves were asurim. So the Gemara says, what kind of objection is Abaye? Nesra ha'asira v'kaima. Are you telling me that she became asura? As if to say the almana at some point in time was muteris l'kohen gadol, and now she became asura. She was asura from the get-go. And therefore, that's not in any way comparable to Rava's kal v'chomer in the case of a Sotah who became asura. And furthermore, says the Gemara, mutala asalahu. Was she ever muteres to the Kohen Gadol? Your whole kal v'chomer is based on the fact that she was muteres and then she became asura. Well, she was never muteres from the get-go. So what kind of kal v'chomer does Abaye have over here? Ella, the Gemara says, no. Abaye's objection to Rava was based on the following kal v'chomer. Eishes Kohen shenensa. So we're talking about a case of a Kohen Hedger who marries a woman, and then never while they were married, she was raped. And the halacha is that when when she has this onus situation, she's asura al baila kohen umes, and her husband dies, he leaves no children, v'yesh lo ach chol, and this kohen hejot, whose married woman was Nensa, and then he died, he has a surviving brother who's a cholol, and a cholol is allowed to marry any woman, like any person can marry, even if she was Nensa, is then, according to your logic, Rava, lotus yamin. Why? Because as a result of the onus, she became asura to baila hakohen, and therefore, certainly be asur lo kolshkein, she cannot become uteres to the ach, who's Ashes Achiv, who's in an Ereva. You can't be marked to that Ereva according to your logic, Rava. And the Gemara answers, Ones be Yisrael Mishra Shari. As far as the Yisrael is concerned, that onus would not generate any Isur. The Gabi Day, therefore, as far as the Achachol is concerned, whose status is equal to that of Yisrael, Leka Yisura. The Anus is not prohibited at all. And if this onus had taken place tachtov, meaning while she was married to the cholol, the yavam, then that onus would not generate an isur. So therefore, the Kal V'chomer falls apart to say that she should become asura olav on the yavam like she is al bailo. Well, wait a minute. That isur, the oser, although it generates an Isra al-Baila because he's a Kohen Kosher, but nevertheless that Oser would not be an Oser as far as the Yavam is concerned. But in the case of an Ashes Ish, and she had Stira, and therefore she became Asur al-Baila, and then there's no difference between the Baal and the Yavam. That mice of Stira generates an Isra that's equal to both the Baal and the Yavam. And therefore, if that Maisa generates an Isa L'Baila, then how much more so, says Rava, would it generate an Isa to the Yavam, who's in any event an Erev HaMidin Eishasa. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Vav. V'elu asuras milechol b'truma. In contrast to the previous Mishnah, well, actually, in the previous Mishnah, if there was kinui, and then stira, then she's not allowed to eat truma. And we're going to have now a Mishnah that there are 5 categories of women who are married that liolam asurim lechol b'truma. Number 1, homeres tmei anilach, that she concedes that she had a znus relationship. And now we apply the principle called Shavya Nafshe Chaticha Disura. So Tosas says that we're talking about a case where there was already Kinu and Stira, and therefore she's nemenes to say Tmeani because of Reglaim Ludova. But we have a Mishnah at the end of the Dorim, Adaf Tzadi, that says that a woman who says Tmeani is not believed. That's because there was no Kini and Stira, there's no Reglayim L'Dover, and Chayshin and Shema Nosna Eineo Bi'ach. Next. V'shabo Eidim Shi Tmeya. She didn't admit that she had adultery, but this wife of a Kohen was subject to the testimony of 2 witnesses that she had a Be'ilah. A woman refuses to drink from the Meimarim, and we don't force her to drink, and therefore she remains in the situation of Isur, and she cannot eat truma. She's Asur l'Baila Kohen. Baila Eino Rotzel Ashkosa, or alternatively, the husband refuses to be mashke her, he doesn't bring her to the Beis HaMikdash, and last but not least, Ushabaila Ba Le'Bader. If on the way up to the Beis HaMikdash, when the husband brings her there to be mashka, he has be'il with her, then there's no hashka. The mayim will not be bodek if he is and she is not naki of sin. And the Torah says in the parsha of Sotah, V'nika ish me avon. That means that only when the ish is menuka mi avon, shelo ba oleh achar shenesra olav, only then do the waters have the power to be bodeka. Omer of Amram Hamilsa Omerlon Rav Sheshas. We have a statement from Rav Sheshas. V'anerlon Einin mimas nisan. And he shed a new light from our Mishnah or upon our Mishnah. So he brings a raya to the Mishnah. Sotah sheyesh la edim b'medina sayam ein habayim bodkim osa. In a case where there are witnesses to testify that she had this nus, just they haven't yet come to Bezdin because they're in Medina Sayam, then the Mayim do not have the power to be Bodekar. So again, there are two Eidim that testify, but they're not here yet, but they could testify if they were here that they saw this nus with that person that the Baal was kinala, and they're out in Medina Sayyam. So we're only going to find out from them their edus later on. But Eina Bayim Bodkim Osa. And the waters do not have the power to be Bodika. Now, we're not sure what would be the din in a case where there's only one aid. And that's the Tosfos Diva Maschil Shebo. That's the fourth Tosfos down from the top of the Omer. My time, but what's the logic of Rav Sheshas? From whence does he derive that the waters do not have power to be Bodekar in a case where there are Eidim on the Tumah? And the answer is the Omer Kra. The pasuk says in the parsha of Sotah Minister vi nitma vi eid ein ba. So we medayik from the words vi eid ein ba deleka diyadaba. It means no one knows whether she had tumah or not. She was in private and seclusion, but there were no eidim. Lafuki ha, but in the case where there are eidim, da'ika diyadaba, so it doesn't fit into the parsha of vi eid ein ba, is therefore Eina Mayim Bodkim Osa. That's the shita of Rav Sheshas. The Anola Eina, and he brought a raya from our Mishnah. The Ketani, it says in our Mishnah, V'shebo la edim shehit mea, that if edim testify, and we'll see exactly when they came into Bezdin, that she had the Maisis Nus, then she can no longer eat Truma. The Asu Edim Amos. When did these witnesses come? And the Gemara is going to analyze the possibilities. The Asu Edim, if the Edim came before she drank, Zonahi, we know that she had Znus. So, of course, it goes without saying that she cannot eat truma, and she's not going to be shosa. Ella, it must be lebasa d'shsai. She survived the bedika of the shtias memorarim, and the Tana's adding to us a brand new idea that we don't assume the Eidim to be shakranim. Now, why not? I mean, after all, if she survived the drinking, it means that she didn't have znus. And the Eidim is saying that she did have znus. So, if there is a principle here that even if the Eidim have not yet arrived in Bezdin, but there are Eidim out there in the Veld that know and can testify that she was Mizanena, but the waters are ineffective, is Shapir, then I can understand the Mishnah that even though she drank and she did not suffer the consequences of a guilty adulteress, right? Is that's not enough to contradict the testimony of the Eidim, because as a result of the knowledge of the Eidim to the effect that she had the tumor, the Mayim were ineffective. But if you're going to argue that despite the existence of these Eidim, the Mayim are bodek, and they have the effective power to determine whether she was guilty or innocent, then since she survived the drinking, it must be that she's innocent. And now we have a clear-cut proof that the Eidim had perjured themselves. And how can we rely on these Eidim? So Amalei Rav Yosef says that I can reject your proof, Rav Sheshes. It's in truth, the waters can effectively determine whether she was guilty or not, despite the fact that there are Eidim. But Amar, we would possibly suggest that Schus Tolelo. So we're going to have a whole sugi about Schus Tolelo, that maybe she has merits, and therefore her punishment was not immediate, right after she drank, but rather it was postponed. But my komifligi, what is the root of the machlokes between Rav Sheshes and Rav Yosef as to whether or not the Mayim have the power to be bodekar, even if there were Eidei Tumah? And the Gemara answers the following. We're going to argue about what the Chachamim hold b'misnazvizna the Rebbe. When Rebbe said that sometimes, as a result of the schus of her maisim tovim, and specifically of her Torah study or her support to a husband or children who are studying Torah, that's going to delay her punishment. She will not die immediately, even if she was guilty. And that's the sheet of Rebbe. Tisnan, we saw in a Mishnah later on Daf Chaf, I believe it is, or Chaf Beis, that Rebbe Omer's Chus Tola, that even though she was guilty of adultery, if she had merits, Maisim Tovim and mitzvos, then she will not die immediately. V'mayim Amor. Now, what does that mean? That's chus tola. So it means that the onesh is not pushed off completely if she was guilty. So she'll have part of the punishment, and therefore any oledes, she will never be able to have children. The ena mashbachas, her health will deteriorate. Ela misnavna, milosha nivel, and gradually her physical situation deteriorates. V'olechas l'sofi mesa v'osamisa. She'll die as if she had died from the memorim in the same kind of a death, meaning bitnot sava v'yarecha nofelas. So that's the shita of Rebbe. And now we're going to have machlokas. What is the shita of the chacham who disagree with Rebbe? That's going to be machlokas Rav Sheshes and Rav Yosef. Rav Sheshes savar bein l'Rebbe bein l'Rabbanon. Even those chus tolala havya misnavna, her body will begin a long process of deterioration. And we're talking about a case Webo Edim Shitmeya. And as we said before, the Edim came after she drank. And if there was no process of deterioration, then that's going to be a proof shelo zinsa, and therefore the Edim are Edei Sheker. Because if in fact, as they testify, she was Tmei and she was guilty of adultery, then she would begin at least the process of physical deterioration. So why are the Edim believed? And again, and why did she become Asura to Truma on the basis of these Edim? So we have no choice but to assume that since there are Edim out there who know that she had Tumah, she was guilty, Mayim not Bodkimosa, and therefore her body did not begin to deteriorate, and therefore we could believe the Edim. Rav Yosef Savar, L'Rebbe Havi Misnavli, you're right. That's true. That according to Rebbe, the Mayim Hamorim should have had, even in the case of Schus, a beginning process of deterioration. Aval Rabbanan lo havi misnavno. Rabbanan never accepted that principle of Rebbe, and they don't believe that she would begin the deterioration process. So therefore, there's no proof from the fact that she's not suffering this punishment to say that she was not nitma. Maybe she was nitma, but the schus is tola, and there won't be any beginning even of a process of physical deterioration. And therefore, we don't have any reason to assume that the Edim are liars. But there's no proof from our Mishnah that if Edim know about the fact that she was Tumah, therefore the Mayim could not be Bodeka. It's very possible the Mayim would be Bodeka, but we always have to consider the possibility that it's Chus Tolala, and therefore we could believe the Edim. And now the Gemara is going to raise a kash on Rav Yosef. Masiv Rav Shimi Bar Ashi. We have in the continuation of that Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ein schus tola b'mayim amorim. He rejects the whole idea of schus tola. Why? Because imata omer schus tola b'mayim amorim madcha ata es hamayim bifnei kol anoshim hashosos. The whole point of mayim amorim, says Rav Shimon, is to make sure that there's fear in the hearts of Sotah, and she'll admit her crime, and then we won't have to destroy the name of Hashem. But now, if there's a possibility of schus tola, so she's not worried. She knows that she has ma'asim tovim, blah blah blah, and therefore she's going to go right into mayim ha'ma'orim. And furthermore, atomotzi shemra al atahoros sheshasu. Those tahoros that drank, and therefore they cleared the reputation. Now they're going to say, no, what are you talking about? Maybe they were guilty. The word on the street is, yeah, they were guilty of adultery. They didn't die. That's because it told schus. So it comes out that according to Reb Shimon, this whole concept of Tol Schus, which was the way we answered and defended Rav Sheshes, doesn't exist. V'im Isa, according to you, Rav Sheshes, then Rav Shimon would again apply his principle, because you're saying maybe the reason there were no, there was no impact of the Mayim Hamarorim and she survived, maybe that's because she's guilty, but there are Eidim who know that she's guilty. Is yesh la'edim medinas hayam namin atamotzi shemer al Torah sheshasu vein omrim tmeos hayu el sheyesh la'edim medinas hayam. Now there's going to be a motzi shemer on the Torah. People are going to say yes, they were guilty, and furthermore, women are not going to be in fear of the Meibarim, because the they'll go into the B'dika knowing full well that the B'dika is ineffective because they're Edom who saw this news. And the Gemara answers, all right, L'shitas Rav Shimon Karmet, you're right, that we cannot reconcile Rav Sheshes with Rav Shimon, but Rav Shimon midischus lo talia, Edom nami lo tolu. That even if they're, just like if she had a schus, that would not undermine the power, the effect, the efficacy of the Mayim Hamorim. So too, if there are Edom out there, that would not undermine the efficacy of the Mayim Hamorim. So Enochinami, Rav Shimon is against Rav Sheshes. But that doesn't mean that you can reject Rav Sheshes. Masiv Rav, but now the Gemara has another attack against Rav Sheshes. And this is from the next part of the Mishnah. It says, V'elu shemin choseyen nisrafos. Right? A Sotah brings what's called a minchas knos, which actually a husband brings the nisrafos. In certain cases, we have to burn the minchas knos under the mizbeach, on the Beis Hadeshin, and you cannot bring those menachos on the mizbeach. They're not reuyos the mizbeach, and not only that, you can't be poda them so that they'll go lechulin.